meditation. It has caused Lord Brahma, who was sitting on the lotus flower for the creative function, to become astonished. So what happened when Lord Brahma heard the sound of Krishna's flute? Yeah. And also when he spoke, the sound of Krishna's flute came out through his mouth as the Vedas. And Anantadev, who was calmly holding all the planets on his hood, was moving in this way and that due to the transcendental vibration from Krishna's flute, which penetrated through the covering of this universe and reached to the spiritual sky. So just like sometimes material sound vibration can be nice, somebody speaks nicely to you and it has a deep effect on your consciousness, then we can't understand Krishna's flute as transcendental. Even the sound of a normal flute player or a flautist, it can be very nice and soothing. There's one famous flautist, so famous, I can't remember his name. Is it Hari Prasad Chaurasia? Yeah, he has his own flute school and everything. People go there and they stay there, just like ashram students, and they have discipline and etc. And both him and his son are very expert, which is very nice for the mind. What to speak of Krishna, the source of all, the Sarva Karna Karnam, the cause of all causes, and he plays his transcendental flute. So that's that. Does anybody else remember anything else about Krishna's flute? It stops the rivers flowing. In fact, it mentions in the Krishna book that the rivers were flowing backwards. Then we could say, oh, how can that be possible? Huh? So the moving entities, they became stunned, and the non-moving entities, like the trees, etc., they were swaying. So, of course, because Krishna is the super soul of all souls, then nothing's impossible for him. If we want to remain in the realm of only what is possible in the mundane platform, then we won't understand. But Krishna's flute, even the gopis, who are the topmost devotees, they were jealous of Krishna's flute because he had so much intimate association. Sri Nectar of Devotion Ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 15, entitled Instructions for Civilized Human Beings. Text 21. Pandita Bahavo Rajan Bahu Pandita Bahavo Rajan Bahugya Samshaya Chida Bahugya Samshaya Chida Sadasas Patayo Api Eke Sadasas Patayo Pieke Santoshat Patanti Adha Santoshat Patantyadha Pandita Bahavo Rajan Bahugya Samshaya Chida Sadasas Patayo Pieke Asantoshat Patantyada Pandita Bahavo Rajan Bahugya Samshaya Chida Sadasas Patayo Pieke Asantoshat Patantyada. Please chant.
Pandita Bahavo Rajan Bahugya samshayachida Sarasvaspatayokeke Asantosha Sakantiyada Pandita Bahavo Rajan Bahugya samshayachida Sadasasvatayokeke Asantoshatpadantiyada.
Anyone else?
Pandita Bahavo Rajan Bahugya samshayachida Sadasasvatayokeke Asantoshatpadantiyada.
Pandita, very learned scholars. Bahava, many. Rajan, O King Yudhisthira. Bahugya, persons with varied experience. Samshaya Chida, expert in legal advice. Sadasa Pataya, persons eligible to become presidents of learned assemblies. Api, even. AK, by one disqualification. Asantoshat, simply by dissatisfaction or greed. Patanti, fall down. Adha, into a hellish condition of life. Translation. O King Yudhishthira, many persons with varied experience, many legal advisors, many learned scholars, and many persons eligible to become presidents of learned assemblies fall down into hellish life because of not being satisfied with their positions. Please repeat. O King Yudhishthira, many persons with varied experience, many legal advisors, many learned scholars, and many persons eligible to become presidents of learned assemblies fall down into hellish life because of not being satisfied with their positions. Srila Prabhupada's purport. For spiritual advancement, one should be materially satisfied. For if one is not materially satisfied, his greed for material development will result in the frustration of his spiritual advancement. There are two things that nullify all good qualities. One is poverty, daridra, dosha, guna, rasi, nasi. If one is poverty-stricken, all his good qualities become null and void. Similarly, if one becomes too greedy, his good qualifications are lost. Therefore, the adjustment is that one should not be poverty-stricken, but one must try to be fully satisfied with the bare necessities of life and not be greedy. For a devotee to be satisfied with the bare necessities is therefore the best advice for spiritual advancement. Learned authorities in devotional life consequently advise that one not endeavour to increase the number of temples and mats. Such activities can be undertaken only by devotees experienced in propagating the Krishna consciousness movement. All the acharyas in South India, especially Sri Ramanujacharya, constructed many big temples, and in North India, all the Goswamis of Vrindavan constructed large temples. Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur also constructed large centres known as Gaudiya Mats. Therefore, temple construction is not bad, provided proper care is taken for the propagation of Krishna consciousness. Even if such endeavours are considered greedy, the greed is to satisfy Krishna, and therefore these are spiritual activities. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chakshunmilitam Yana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Dukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Lagate Girim Yat Kripa Tamam Vande Shri Girim Dinataranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Hare. Okay, you just hear many persons with varied experience, many legal advisors, many learned scholars, and many persons eligible to become presidents of learned assemblies fall down into hellish life because of not being satisfied with their positions. When I was a young man, I used to, before I joined the temple, I was becoming quite thoughtful and I was just analysing why I had to work so many days a week, so many hours a day, in a job to make someone else well off. Well, you should be satisfied with whatever has been given to you. And I was thinking, actually, I'd be happy to work less and get paid less because I don't need all the modern conveniences. I was thinking that if you can't be happy with a little, you'll not be happy with a lot. If your happiness is dependent on material wealth, then when that material wealth is there, then the other side of the coin will be there. And this Krishna speaks about this. The appearance and disappearance of happiness and distress are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So arising from sense perception, how is that? How do they arise from sense perception? Happiness and distress. Toksha.
Because they're a result of the circumstances that you surrounded by.
Okay. Anything else, Alan?
Because you could experience enjoyment through the gratification of certain senses, and when that gratification isn't there, you'll be experiencing sadness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else?
I was going to say, also I was thinking about that word disturbed. Also, it links with discouraged, which is something that as devotees we may come across, being discouraged at times, but it's just another form of being disturbed.
Mm-hmm. Can be. But also devotees are sentient beings. They're not without feelings. So even if one is disturbed and one continues, it's we should be careful not to just write off someone's disturbance as being like some kind of neophyte thing. So these are good points. And we also remember we've got 5 knowledge acquiring senses, and the mind is the center of the senses. So if in our mind we have conjured up some kind of artificial standard of necessity that I won't be happy until I have this. Like some people say, if I just had $1 million, then I'd be happy. And then say, well, just one more million, so that I can keep one in the bank and enjoy off the other. But we find that people, unless they've already found a way to be self-satisfied, and Lord Chaitanya speaks about this called Atma Rama. So Atma means the self, and the Rama means pleasure. Taking pleasure in the self, because the self by nature is blissful. So if we're working towards spiritual values and self-realization, then just like the devotees, when they're dedicated to Krishna consciousness, when they're absorbed, Prabhupada talks about building temples. They say this is good, as long as it's for the purpose of propagating Krishna consciousness. If it's simply to build an empire, then how many empires have been built up? Just like children, they build a nice big sandcastle, and someone comes along and kicks it, or the tide comes in and washes it away. But in due course of time, then it will be it will dissolve. An unusual person to quote in Bhagavatam class, but I remember Jimi Hendrix saying a similar thing. He says, and some castles made of sand fall into the sea eventually. So every empire, people are also digging in the rubble of the past to find out about ancient civilizations, but meanwhile the ancient knowledge is still relevant today. The ancient knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, they should be digging into Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, not digging up earth or using their technology to find remains under the forests or under the oceans or under the sand of the deserts. But when they find it, what real value is it, they'll just speculate. They just speculate and say, oh yeah, this was some fashionable item that people used to use, or this was maybe used in some worship, but they don't actually know. And it doesn't matter anyway, because civilizations come and go. Alexander, wasn't it Alexander the Great? I wonder if he gave himself that name. It's just like, perhaps he believed his own press. So he was conquering so many places, and I think he wasn't successful in India, or he made some little headway, but there was some strong opposition there. But someone asked him, you've conquered so many places, and finally, once you conquer everywhere you want to conquer, then what will you do? And basically his thing was, I'll just retire and spend time with my children or grandchildren, whatever it was, and just be happy there. He says, well, why don't you just do that now and save a lot of people getting killed? So what is the goal? So in the mind that they conjure up something that has to be a certain standard where they'll be happy. If they don't get this object, then I can't be happy. But how many objects have we thought we'd be happy with? We got them, and then the novelty wears off. Or like Atoksha, he used to be involved in advertising. He was saying that they advertise just the point of, was it again? Anticipation. Like for example, if they're advertising some cold drink on a hot day, and the drink is probably like poison for you practically, they don't show you, they don't put it up on the billboards, 30 years of drinking such and such, and this is what happens to your internal organs. They don't stick that up on the billboards, but they'll show you some person dripping with sweat, burnt red like a lobster, and a bottle of something with the ice cold with the condensation dripping off of it, and everyone thinks, yeah, I need to get one of those. And this is the kind of principle of the material world, is anticipation. It's actually more which catches the living entity than the thing itself. So it might seem like a contradiction in one sense here, because spiritual life, you think, well, one should be poverty stricken. One should, and the first principle of spiritual life is nirmama, nothing is mine. And basically that's because we see that everything belongs to Krishna. He is the proprietor of everything. One time Prabhupada was in Australia and he was speaking with some reporters, and he says that he was trying to break down their material conditioning of identifying as an Australian, living in Australia, thinking like this is a permanent thing. So he says that life was existing, the planet was existing before we come along. It'll be here after we've gone. And in the middle, we come along and we fight over some false sense of proprietorship. So the thing is also, we do have karma, which gives us our just deserves, whether it be results of pious or impious activities coming in the form of rewards or punishments. Now they are individual to each individual person. And Prahlad Maharaj states in the 7th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, that whatever is due one in this life is already determined because of what we did in our past life. So the question of destiny and free choice comes up. So if it's already predestined, then what's the necessity of endeavouring, right? So you'd think, well, I'll just sit in my flat and everything will happen, or it won't happen. So what's wrong with that? Is that how it should be? I talk to you.
Lecture which Prabhupada says, Arjuna sat in the chariot and said to Krishna, okay, well, you take care of everything then. But Krishna wanted to use Arjuna as an instrument. And so it was illustrating this principle of if you make an endeavor, then Krishna will reciprocate with that endeavor. Of course, ultimately, it's up to Krishna. All we can do is make the endeavor, and then the result is in his hands. But we should be attached to making the endeavor, not the result. You know?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita that one cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. Just like some people are very expert at doing nothing and claiming benefits, but they don't realize that they're becoming karmically indebted. And say, for example, everyone was to do that, then there would be nobody working in the shops, there'd be nobody making the food, nobody transporting the food. If everyone thought, oh, well, I'll just go on the dole, that sounds like a good proposition. So Krishna says one has to be, even to maintain your physical body, one has to work. If one is so poverty, so going back to this original point, but if one is so poverty-stricken, well, there's two sides that say that either if one is suffering too much or enjoying too much, then spiritual life generally is not on the agenda. If you're suffering so much, then what you're thinking of is how to mitigate the suffering. You're not pondering the serious questions of life. You might think, why am I suffering? But it's hard to be philosophical and really ponder things and try to meditate and get to understand things when simply all it's in your mind is how can I stop this suffering? So therefore they say if one is suffering too much, then it's not conducive. So if one is poverty stricken and one is, unless one is very advanced like Sudama Brahman, him and his wife were so poverty stricken, they actually had to share the same piece of cloth, so only one person could go out into public at a time. This is how poor they were. And apart from their undergarments, but he was at school with Krishna, and his wife said, why don't you go and visit your friend Krishna? You know, he's the king of Dwarka, he'll help you out surely. But Sudama Brahman was such a pure-hearted soul that he thought, no, I don't want to bother Krishna with this. But his wife nagged him, and he went. And Krishna knew, being the super soul and being omniscient, he knew why Sudama was coming to visit him. And even though Sudama was a poor Brahmin, he never complained about his situation, he accepted it. So it's that's one lesson, is that whatever situations happen to us, if we can accept it without complaining, then that's a very good position to be in. Because sometimes accepting or not accepting it, we're still in the position anyway. And so when he went to see Krishna, before he left, actually, his wife put some broken dried rice in a little bit of cloth and tied it and put it in his dhoti and said, give this to Krishna. But he wasn't planning to give it to Krishna because he thought, Krishna's the king of Dwarka here. He's got so many opulences at his disposal. How can I offer, something like this to Krishna? So he just went to see his friend. Basically, that's what was in his mind. And he wasn't planning to ask for anything, even though his wife was saying, ask Krishna to help us. He wasn't planning to ask for anything. But Krishna, knowing everything, then he said, I believe you brought some gift. What is this? And he put his hand into his waistband and pulled it out and said, this is such a feast. And he dropped one grain into his mouth. And was it Rukmini? She took a grain also. And because Rukmini is the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi, then Krishna and Rukmini were saying, by this offering you have satisfied the entire universe. Because when you offer to Krishna, it's considered the basic principle of devotional service is that When you put food in the stomach, all the other parts of the body are nourished. But if the hand just wants to enjoy the food and it decides, I'm going on strike, the tongue's always getting to enjoy it and the stomach gets to enjoy it. But what about me? I'm just serving, so you're not getting the food, I'm going to have it myself. And stuff you guys. Like I told you, did a drama once called The Senses Strikes. All the senses went on strike and decided the stomach's not getting, the tongue's not getting it, and the stomach's not getting it. And they're just the big enjoyers. But eventually they started to wither and they realized, okay, we give it to the stomach. So this is the natural position of the living entity. When we disconnect from Krishna, then we're trying to water the leaves of the tree or the branches. But when we connect with Krishna, we're watering the root and everything is nourished. So by Sudama's offering to Krishna, then when Sudama's offering to Krishna, then Krishna was satisfied. Unbeknown to him, that back home, then Krishna had manifested so much opulence for him and his wife, so they needn't be in need any longer. So on the other side, if one is too opulent, then one can become proud of their wealth. Just like sometimes we go out and we try to interest people in these books. And one time I was selling some books door to door, and I went up this very perfectly manicured garden and driveway to this very nice house with nice cars, and the person seemed to be materially well situated in a nice part of town. And the person said, I don't need this, I'm a self-made man. And I says, yeah, but all it takes is one slight adjustment in your life, and then all this could be finished. It could be, and I'll get out of here, I don't want to hear this. And we've seen this so many times. Like we used to travel around in the motorhome, going to all the towns and villages. It was called Every Town and Village, in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya. And we went to a place called Creetown, which is down in the southwest of Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway, I think it is. And there's an old man there, friendly man. He ran a caravan site, and we'd stay there. And he was always very jolly, happy, jokey, very kind man. Then one year we went there. I went to check in as usual, and the whole atmosphere was so gloomy. And what had happened was that he had got cancer, and him and his family were just very depressed. You could see that, you could practically feel the atmosphere of impending gloom. And it was quite a stark lesson to see that someone so happy, now unhappy. So in spiritual life, then, happiness and distress, those who are advanced in spiritual life, they become more steady. Through all the trials and tribulations, they become happy and they become steady in the happiness and distress because they understand, first of all, that we're not this body, we're eternal spirit souls. Then what's really the worst that can happen to the body is that it becomes so damaged that we can't survive in it any longer. Just like you have a car, some things go wrong, you take it to the garage, and it gets fixed. And some things, no matter what they do, they just can't fix it. Or it gets so old and worn and useless that it has to be discarded. So this is exactly like the body and the soul. The body becomes old and worn, and just like sometimes we have decent cars, sometimes we don't. We used to run around in some real old bangers, but it doesn't matter to us. Whatever we've got, we'll use it in Krishna's service. If the opulence we have just now is taken away, then we'll still continue to serve. And then if Krishna gives us so much opulence, we'll continue to serve because we use it in his service. So whatever one has, we use it in Krishna's service, and then that is called using a thorn to pluck a thorn. So if you put your foot on a thorn, if you're walking around Govardhan Hill in Vrindavan, and you end up with a big thorn up your heel, and they can be pretty big thorns, quite strong, if you ever do that, circumambulation of go over down the hill, you do it in your bare feet. This is how we do this service. And sometimes you get a thorn and you find another thorn to pluck it out. Just like sometimes you get a splinter, or in Scotland we call it a skelf, and someone might get a little pin or a needle to pluck it out. So similarly you do like that. So material attachment, then that is entangling. But if we use our material attachment in Krishna's service, the very same thing, which was entangling, becomes a source of liberation. So therefore, this is called Bhakti Yoga. And this is mentioned by Krishna Bhagavad Gita as being the culmination of all other types of yogas, dharmas, etc. Yoginam api sarvisham madgate nantaratmana sharavan bhajate yomam same yog tatamomataha. And of all yogis, he who always abides in me with great faith, worshipping in transcendental loving service, is the highest of all. So the other paths of yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, etc., they're meant to bring one to the conclusion that Vasudevi sarvam iti sa mahatma sudurlabhaha. So a mahatma, a great soul, the conclusion is that one becomes a great soul when they've come to understand that Krishna or Vasudeva sarvam iti, that he is the cause of everything. So there's many quotes there in the different shastras, like everything rests on me as pearls strung on a thread. So you can just imagine, most of the devotees, they'll wear neck beads, but if you can't wear neck beads without the thread, it's so important part of it. And Krishna is that thread which holds everything together. And he says that as well, that as we were mentioning earlier on, that work has to be performed. One cannot maintain one's physical body without some kind of work. And he says, even though there's no duty ascribed to me, he's not required to do anything. That if he stopped, even Krishna is doing his duties to maintain everything. If he stopped, then all the worlds would be put into ruination. So interesting points being made in this chapter, instructions for civilized human beings. So either these instructions are for people who are civilized enough to understand them, or for those who want to become civilized. So non-civilized human life would mean what, for example? What's the difference between civilized and non-civilized life? Yeah, so what are the four propensities of animal life? Yeah. So those are necessities in life. There wouldn't be any, if there was no mating going on, then there'd be no more population. It's like India, where's the country where this culture came from. It's not that there's the decreasing in population, but and eating, everyone has to eat. Sleeping has to be there. Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, one who neither eats enough or eats too much or sleeps too much or doesn't sleep enough cannot be a yogi. So we have to be balanced in our activities. And sometimes, out of our pride, we try to make that balance ourselves, but really we should speak with others who have more experience in that to figure out what is the balance. And so the eating, sleeping, mating, defending one's animal propensities. And Prabhupada says one should try to reduce these to zero. Now, of course, we shouldn't do this artificially. It was mentioned that the Goswamis of Vrindavan, they were so absorbed in Krishna consciousness that they forgot to sleep. They forgot to eat. They didn't think, I'll not eat and I'll not sleep so that everyone will think I'm such a great person. They weren't thinking like that. They were just so absorbed in Krishna, they just forgot it. So if we work towards that, where Krishna consciousness is so important that sometimes we work past lunchtime and didn't even notice, because we're absorbed in Krishna consciousness. Or sometimes the devotee giving class, we're listening so attentively that we forget to hanker after breakfast, which will be there in a few minutes. Other times, if we're not really paying attention, we'll just be thinking, when's he going to shut up? Because, why can't we have breakfast at 8:15 instead of 8:30? The mind might be thinking like that. But us being in Krishna consciousness, absorption is not someone else's, it's not based on what someone else says or does, it's based on us, based on our endeavor. We have to take accountability and responsibility for ourselves. If we say, oh, I can't be a devotee because of this one, then that's just like trying to find an excuse. And Maya will give us an excuse. Therefore, we have so many philosophies, so many different breakaways, because Maya's got unlimited excuses for you if you want them. And there was that age-old example of the disciple, distressed, goes to the spiritual master and says, Maya won't let me go. She won't let me go. I've tried, and she just won't let me go. So the spiritual master stands up and he runs out of the temple. And the disciple's thinking, oh, what's happened? Have I disturbed him, And he goes outside and he sees the spiritual master giving a tree a hug. Actually, no, he's embracing the tree and he's saying, let me go, let me go. So his disciple understood, this is what's happening. He's the one that's holding on. So that is like us as well. Maya's only there if we desire to be Maya. And so I remember there's a wonderful book called Life Comes from Life. And it's a transcription of conversations between Srila Prabhupada and Swarup Damodar Maharaj. And at one point, Swarup Damodar Maharaj, who was a PhD in, what was he a PhD in? Organic chemistry. He said, Srila Prabhupada, so the living entities, male and female, they're comprised of the same elements. So why is sex desire there? And Prabhupada says, because they want it. So it's based on desire. Because you think, well, and that sex desire is the basic envy of Krishna, wanting to enjoy separately from Krishna. And in Sanskrit, it's known as Maitunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. So just like everyone is shackled, very strong shackles, no matter how much they break free, they can't. So therefore, great renunciants, people who have actually renounced the shackles of sex life, then they can free the devotees also from this. Therefore, it's important that we get association of great devotees. And how to become free from that? How to become free from this bodily conception of life is to replace it with the transcendental conception of life. Using everything in Krishna's service, then we become free. Yogya vai Vishnu, one should do whatever we're doing, we do it for the pleasure of Krishna. We learn the art of devotional service. And not in the guise of being a devotee, we're still secretly harboring desires. We have to be honest with ourselves and think, I'm still hankering for things. Why am I still hankering? Why not? Why I'm not peaceful and satisfied with my lot? In fact, when devotees become, even some materialists, they have this minimalist conception that they find accumulation of so many things just to be an entrapment. But still, it's not that they become transcendentalists, they just often go for more experiences than things. But I know one friend who was also trying to practice minimalism. But if you open any cupboards in the house, they just like all come avalanche of stuff coming out the cupboards. So on the surface, everything looked very minimalistic and nothing around, but you open a cupboard and there's all sorts of things just crammed in there. And to me, I was thinking this is actually a kind of reflection of our consciousness, that sometimes externally we're doing this and that, but internally we're still keeping so much garbage out of sight. And we have to clean up those cupboards. It's like, we're not going to do anything about this. You know, I've been practicing Krishna consciousness for so many days, weeks, months, years, and I'm hanging on to this, which I've not really done anything about. I'm not going to do anything about it. Those days are over. Or why am I holding on to this? And Krishna says, whatever one is most attached to, if we give that up for his service, it qualifies us for eternal life. So we may be attached to whatever's in the forefront of our consciousness, but if we give it up and think, okay, we can do a Haridas Thakur on this. Haridas Thakur, he was such an advanced devotee. And at that time, he was living in Orissa, I think. Jagannath Puri, I think he was staying there. And at that time, the local governors and magistrates were some Muslim leaders, and they were envious of this the advancement of Haridas Thakur, because people were honouring him as a great saint, and they wanted to defame him. So they hired a beautiful prostitute to go in the middle of the night. The Haridas Thakur was so advanced that he was one of those devotees who would chant 3 times 64 rounds a day, which basically leaves you an hour to eat, sleep, do bodily maintenance, etc. And we can't imitate that. We've seen one devotee talking like this, "Oh, I think I'll give up sleeping," and the words were hurled out of his mouth and he fell asleep. It was quite a comical arrangement by Krishna. So this prostitute was sent to Haridas Thakur, and he said, and she was presenting some seductive poses in front of him and using sweet words to try to capture his mind. And he was saying, "Oh, my dear," I think her name was Chintamani, was it? Or is it another one? That's the one that was Bilva Mangal Thakur. So anyway, whatever, I don't know if she had a name, or she probably had a name, but I don't know if we know it. It wasn't stated. But anyway, he says, certainly, she says, "Oh, please enjoy with me. You know, you're such handsome." He was young at that time, actually, so maybe he wasn't in Puri. But you're so strong and effulgent and handsome. You know, why not enjoy with us? Would enjoy with me? And he says, "Certainly we will enjoy, but first I have to finish my prescribed rounds. I've taken a vow. I have to chant so many. So please just sit peacefully and while I chant." Next night, the same thing. She came again because she eventually fell asleep. Daylight came and she went away. Next night, she said, "Oh, please, you know, can we enjoy together?" And he said that, "Well, surely today I will finish my prescribed number of rounds and then we shall enjoy." So she sat there, and then because of listening to him, she became purified. She started chanting herself. And then daylight came and she went away. Third night came, same again. But this time, she'd become purified by hearing Haridas Thakur chant and by chanting herself. And she broke down and confessed that she had been sent there to distract him from his vows and to disgrace him. And he says, "I know, but to deliver you, other than that, I would have just left this place." And she became a great devotee. She gave up that, and the plan of the envious person to defame Haridas Thakur was foiled. So doing a Haridas Thakur means that when the mind comes up and said, "Do this, do that," etc., we just think, "Yes, sure, we'll do that. But right now we're just going to do this service, or right now I'm just going to chant." So in this way, we try to kind of pacify our mind. If we're fighting with the mind, that's also acting on the mind's platform. So the mind, Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, can be our best friend or our worst enemy. And if you keep fighting with your enemy all the time, then what happens is the fight just keeps going, isn't it? So if you make friends with your enemies, then there's no enmity there any longer. So therefore we see in the songs of the Vaishnava acharyas, those great teachers that came before us, they're addressing their mind, Bhajamana Radhe Govinda, my dear mind, just worship Radha Govinda. Bhajahuri Mana Sri Nandanandana. So they're addressing the mind, they're directing the mind, my dear mind, just, we've been so many places in this world together, let's just practice Krishna consciousness. Let's try to become absorbed in Krishna. Or the mind's making some demand, and basically the mind is playing back whatever we've programmed in it before. So if we can just pacify the mind by saying yes, certainly. We're basically pacifying ourselves. We're saying yes, certainly we can look at that later, but let's just do this first. And then because Rishikesha, Rishikena, Sevanam Bhakti Uchite, because meanwhile, we are engaging the senses in a higher activity, then senses become purified and become satisfied, and then in due course we forget about these things, and ultimately these things don't come up in due course of time. So in this Atmaramas Chamunayo, the great saintly persons are self-satisfied, then whether they have, just like Bharat Maharaj, India was named after Bharat, it's called Bharatavarsh. People call it India, but actually it's called Bharat. That's the real name for it. Actually, when BP wanted to open some businesses in India, because of the history of the British Raj, then the Indians weren't so keen on this name British Petroleum, but they called it Bharat Petroleum. So it was called BP. But India was called Bharat after the great king Bharat Maharaj. In fact, the planet was called Bharatavarsh. He was considered to be such a great emperor. And although he was such a great emperor and had the world under his control, basically, whatever he wanted, he could get, whatever he wanted to do, he could do, nobody could oppose him, etc. But he was actually a great devotee, and he wasn't attached to it. So at a certain point in life, he gave it all up. He left. He became a renunciant. But he also gave us a very great lesson that even though he was a great renunciant, he became attached to a deer. And on account of becoming attached to that deer, he became overly attached. And at the time of death, he remembered that deer and didn't remember Krishna. He took birth as a deer, but because he was such a great devotee, he was also blessed with remembrance of Krishna. And he would hang around where the sages were doing transcendental discourses in the forest, etc. And he would hear their next life, he became Jad Bharat. So Krishna mentions in Gita that even one of the roaming senses in which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. So someone may be very controlled in one thing or another, but if we allow the senses to focus on something which distracts us from Krishna, then that can spoil the other things which we're trying to make advancement from, and this is mentioned here as well. So if we have, in any case, whether we're opulent or whether we're poor, then we try to remember Krishna. One of the most ecstatic-looking faces ever seen was a young beggar lady in Vrindavan. She had leprosy and she had wounds there with it. And she was coming out of the Krishna Balaram temple in Vrindavan, and she just looked so, immediately it struck me that she looked so happy, even though she was suffering greatly physically, and her being a young person, it meant that her life was going to be quite compromised. But immediately, it was my first time to India, first time to Vrindavan. Immediately I thought, so many people in the West have got so much facility, so much access to healthcare, etc., but they're nowhere near as happy as this person. It's like one of the most beautiful smiles ever seen. And it seems like she was happy. She was in Krishna's land. That smile just spoke 1,000 words. And it made me realize that, what am I complaining about in life? We complain about things, which are just so irrelevant. We get ourselves caught up in things. And here's someone, if we were in this condition, we'd be just full of self-pity, for example. But she never had an ounce of self-pity. She was just happy to be accepting her lot and be in Krishna's abode. So this is for us also to practice accepting our lot and continue in our devotional service. Despite happiness or distress, we continue with our devotional service. It's not conditional. And this is what Krishna is encouraging us, is to engage in unconditional service in that way that we can qualify to get out of this material world. If we have conditions, that means we still have some business in the material world. And then Krishna will fulfill our desire. If we have some business in the material world, we have to stay here to fulfill it. And just to finish, is that many things have been used in Krishna's service, just like, for example, greed. Greed is never satisfied. But if our greed can be utilized in Krishna's service, and competitive spirit, if it's without envy, that can be used in Krishna's service as well, to engage in more service and encourage others to engage in more service. So we'll just stop there. Anyone get any questions or comments? Alan?
I'd just like to say thank you for a very illuminating class. Enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm speaking to myself.
It was just a comment, really. I just read Chaitanya Charan. He was saying that Maya's job isn't to give us material desires, it's to teach us the futility of material desires. So that was quite nice.
Exactly. And Prabhupada talks about that in the first canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, where he says, material life or material world is constructed for those who want to enjoy separately from Krishna, and in doing so, they'll become frustrated and turn back to Krishna, because it's an incompatible situation. We are of a higher nature than material nature, and we're trying to enjoy the inferior material nature. And when finally we've suffered enough, or become wise enough, or learned through the school of hard knocks, or whatever it happens to be, we turn back to Krishna, and we start hearing. And Prabhupada said that a little pessimism about the material world is very healthy for spiritual life. Because if we think simply we can enjoy, then what would be the impetus to become free from it? We wouldn't recognize the suffering.
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect on when Hiranyakashipu took over, he was in control of everything. So the planets couldn't go into inauspicious constellations. Everything had to be good. So nobody was going old. Nobody was getting disease. The fruits were always getting produced. The flowers were always there. Everything was completely hunky-dory for sense gratification. So he interfered with the whole educational system that's supposed to be there, forced this situation where it was just, and then nobody wants to leave the material world.
But he was never satisfied still, was he? He was always hankering for more opulence and more opulence. He wasn't happy until he conquered everything that could be conquered. And then what do you do? Just like you wrote that script for Lust, Anger and Greed, was it? And what was it? The character of greed was, you can never get enough, right? Can never get too much. There's no such thing as too much. And we see that can be taken to extreme in all sorts of situations. And Prabhupada talks about this as artificially raising the standard of living. Like there was an example of that homeless guy in Edinburgh who was recognised by Evan Welsh, is it? That author who also did some movie, and he engaged him in some movies and he got into the Hollywood circle. But eventually he came back to Scotland and he said that his standard of living didn't really improve, because however much money he made, he was just spending it to stay in that circle of people. You make 10,000 a week, you'll be spending the same thing, you end up with the same in your pocket. So he kind of realised that it was an artificial standard of living. And so much suffering goes on account of people raising their standard of living to some artificially high standard. Simple living, high thinking. Okay, it's going to go around the key. So Prabhupada key. Rantaran Srimad Bhagavatam key. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Gaura Bhakta Vrinda key.